I am Anna Seawald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. My mission is to end violence against children. Through my work and this podcast, I help parents break generational cycles of trauma, reconnect with their authentic selves, and raise emotionally healthy children. Together, we've built a global community of conscious parents who want something different for the next generation. Join us as we create a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, the number one predictor of your child's well-being, your mental health. I am honored to welcome back a returning guest, Dr. Paul Conti, a Stanford and Harvard-trained psychiatrist, renowned author, and president of Pacific Premier Group. He's back to talk about his new book, What's Going Right, where he offers a powerful paradigm-shifting approach to mental health. Instead of focusing on what's wrong, he invites us to ask a different question. What's going right? In our conversation, we explore the structure and function of the self and the three fundamental human drives, the generative, aggressive, and pleasure drives. When these drives fall out of balance, mental health challenges emerge. We also talk about what it actually means to optimize mental health and why this matters so deeply for us as parents. Because the strongest predictor of a child's well-being is parental mental health. And at the time when maternal mental health is declining, this conversation feels more important than ever. We spend time on the generative drive, the part of you that helps you get things done, solve problems creatively, support others, and feel connected to something larger than yourself. When it's active, it brings a sense of peace, contentment, and delight. Who doesn't want to live in the generative drive? And we also talk about the practices that make this work real: compassionate curiosity and self-inquiry, learning to understand ourselves more deeply, and in doing so, rewrite the narratives we live by. I hope you find this conversation as meaningful as I did. Please enjoy, and as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You've been on my podcast before. You may not remember because you are on all sorts of podcasts, but it was a wonderful conversation. And at the time, I don't remember the year, it was one of the most downloaded episodes of that year. I should have looked what year it was.
And when I saw you on the screen and read your name, I said, I know this person. I did remember saw you, but I didn't know that, of course. So thank you very much for telling me.
Yeah, it was a very nice conversation. And I have your first book here too. So I'm a fan. And you are from New Jersey, and I am in New Jersey. I bet you didn't remember that.
No, that I didn't. Where are you at in Jersey?
This is the first time I read in your book that you were from Trenton. So I live in Princeton now.
Okay.
Not that far from Trenton, but a whole different world, you know?
It's not that far in some ways and very far in others, right?
Yes. It's its own little bubble, you know?
Yeah.
Princeton is its own bubble, and Trenton is its own bubble, I guess.
Very
so
different places.
I really appreciated that you opened up in this second book about your own life and struggles. So that makes it very relatable and makes you human too, you know? So that's, I know it's hard to do, but I really liked reading that part in your book.
Thank you. Thank you. I do appreciate that. I want to be relatable in the sense that we'll see, these are human problems, right? And we all have something going on, and life is hard, and to, feel met in that way.
Yeah. What I love about this book, it's the orientation. It's what's going right. Because oftentimes our focus is on what's not working, the negative,
Yes.
what's lacking, especially when it comes to mental health. And I guess in general, right? Even just the COVID-19 pandemic, everything was all like negative and fear-based. So there is a quote in your book, health is not valued till sickness comes. That's true for physical health and mental health. So what I want to ask you is, like, we do so much for our physical health. We know when we're ill, we go to the doctor, we sleep,
Right.
we eat, we exercise. But when it comes to mental health, it's not as clear.
Yes.
So I want you to speak about how can we be the same way as we are proactive or knowledgeable about our physical health, bring that type of knowledge and understanding towards our mental health.
That's a primary goal of the book, is to bring that information, that just as we have an understanding of our physical health and we want to build our physical health and we want it there, in case we have a problem with our health, we also want our physical health to be as good as it can be so that we get the most out of life. The reason we're able to do that is we have a basic understanding, and a person doesn't have to be in the medical field to understand, okay, we have a human body and the body has organs and it has muscles and joints, and we want to eat well and we want to get enough sleep and exercise. We understand these things, so we're not afraid of physical health. We say, okay, I can think about my physical health because there's a route of approach, right, in order to make it better. And the same is true of mental health. It is true, but we have not brought that information to the fore. The field has not exercised the leadership to say, just as there's a way of understanding ourselves physically, there's a way of understanding our mental health, so we don't have to be afraid of it, right? We don't have to hide. I mean, it's very interesting. If we start talking about physical health, people are often interested. We understand there's wellness and there's a whole wellness industry, and we want to be physically healthy. But if we say mental health, people shy away, right, and get afraid, or there's even a reflexive shame just to say mental health, and we fear things we don't understand. Human beings want understanding. So the fact that there is a way of understanding, that we all have a structure of self, we all have a function of self, we all have these drives. So just as we understand the basics about our body and our physical health, we can understand the basics about our brain and mind and our mental health. And then, this route of approach works for humans, right? It works for all of us, and we can build good mental health just as we build good physical health. And we do that in case problems and stresses come our way, and also because that's how we live the best life.
Yeah, oftentimes it is kind of like I want to help the listeners to sort of evaluate. I'll give maybe a personal example. A few years ago, I interviewed an expert on EMDR therapy, and I became wildly interested. I'm like, you know what, I should go and try this type of therapy. And I went. Before you go to the therapy, you fill out lots of paperwork and things of this nature. And when I went to the first session, she asked me, like, what's wrong? Like, why are you here? Well, I didn't want to lie and say I just curious, I want to try EMDR therapy. She said, it seems like everything is going well in your life. You don't have anxiety, you don't have depression, you don't have any concerning signs. And that kind of puzzled me. I'm like, how do I know if I am mentally well? Or maybe like I can do things preventatively, or maybe
Right.
there are things that are not well that I'm not aware of. So these are important questions. Can you help us through those questions? Are these the right questions to ask even?
I think so. I think it's important for us to do our best to take stock of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And also if there are trusted others around us, to inquire with people so that we try and get the best idea we can about our mental health. Is there anything that's bothering me? Am I hiding something from myself? What am I saying to myself when no one else is around, right? Is there anything weighing on me? Is there any changes in me, for the negative that had happened over time? We can ask ourselves all these questions, and I think we should, right? I think we should. And even if we don't have clear answers and we say, I think I'm doing okay, right? Then prevention is very important. We don't say, if someone goes to the doctor for their annual physical and checkup, we don't say, well, why are you here? You don't have a complaint. You seem to be doing okay. Why would you come for a physical and some labs? We say, oh, that's good that you're doing that, right? It's good. You want to be healthy. And if we make this parallel between physical health and mental health, then we won't see it that way. We're just looking for what's going wrong. Right? And if there's nothing obviously going wrong in you, why would you be here? Right? It's a route of approach that will not help us be healthier. Right? So if you were coming for EMDR, presumably you were bringing something to EMDR. So I'd like to feel differently about this, even though you don't have maybe a bunch of symptoms attached to it. And it's interesting, and I think it's unfortunate that the response you got is typical in the field, right? Of why would you want to do something preventive? Or if you're not having a bunch of symptoms, why would you worry about that? And again, this is symptomatic of this problem where we have separated physical health and mental health. And, to state the obvious that isn't always treated as obvious, we are one being, the mind is attached to the body, and our physical and mental health, are interwoven. So if we see ourselves that way, and we know that we can bring mechanisms of understanding to our mental health, then doesn't it just make sense? We want to be as healthy as we can be, physically and mentally. We don't have to approach one, the physical, and be afraid of the other, the mental. And I do think it's a failing in the field that we come from the perspective of what is wrong. The DSM is this big book that has, it's how many pages? It's over 1,000 pages of, of all the things that are wrong, right? All the things that can be wrong. And then what happens is we see ourselves from the perspective of pathology. And then, of course, we're afraid to think about or talk about mental health, because the reflex is, what is wrong with me? Or if I think about it, what am I going to find that's wrong with me? Or someone else is going to find. And that's just not helpful or real. There's way more going right than going wrong in absolutely everyone who's here, right? Who's here, who's living life, who's paying attention. If we see it that way, because that is the truth of it, then we're emboldened to look at, well, okay, what is there that I want to be different? Right? Instead of getting down on myself, like a lot of us do, where we're saying, what's wrong with me? Or why can't I do something right? Or why can't I do something better? We get so down on ourselves that we can't find our problems. That's what makes us hide from our problems. But if I say, look, there's a lot that's going well, that's adaptive in me. There's a lot that I've overcome. There's a lot that's healthy in me. Okay, with that framework, let me really look at the things that I want to be different. Right? And this is the way that we become healthier. Just as someone could say, my physical health is in pretty good shape, right? But, I am having knee pain, right? Just one example. Okay, your physical health is overall good, but you should go get your knee looked at. Let's also look at what needs improvement. So it's not a Pollyanna view of let's just look at what's going right. No, coming through the route of what's going right is what lets us look at and solve the things that aren't in a healthy place or aren't where we want them to be.
Yeah, I love this lens so much because it's not pathologizing, and it's a good place to be as a person. You're right. There are a lot of things going right for all of us. And just like physical health, you may be struggling with something, but your whole system is not falling apart all at the same time. Same is true for mental health. But what I like what you were saying, like we do annually go for checkups and dental cleanings. And I recently went for my heart scan because I'm over 50 now. Calcium score has to be 0 and all of those things. But for mental health, there is that stigma, there is the shame. I wish it was the same for mental health. At least like some regularity is needed. I like that you're trying to popularize, and bring this approach forward. And hopefully, like if I go to my physical doctor for my annual physical, he should also ask me questions about mental health or direct me to someone. I think it's somehow left for the individual to seek help. So my daughter is a senior in high school. This year, in their school, a student committed suicide in the beginning of the academic school year because of academic pressure. And my daughter was devastated, and the whole classroom was devastated, right? And my daughter goes, Mom, there is no discussion about mental health. It's all academics, that we don't know how to help the person. Maybe he needed help. How could he reached out? And so the prevailing thing is, there is a counselor in school, there are all these people. If you need help, you should come to us. But we know very well when you're struggling, you tend to isolate yourself. If you're depressed and suicidal,
Yes.
you're not going to reach out for help. Like there should be systems at least in place, like the annual checkup or something for the schools, so that we can prevent those kinds of things from happening.
Yes.
Right?
I agree. I agree very, very strongly. Very strongly. And if you think about our physical health, including sometimes our very survival, right? Our mental health is key, right, to our physical health. If I'm depressed or I'm having panic attacks all the time, or I can't sleep, or whatever may be going on in me, my physical health is going to suffer. And if my mental health is suffering enough, people can get to the place where they end their lives. So the importance of mental health and of paying attention to mental health is so huge and glaring. But nonetheless, we don't do that. I mean, if you think about physical health, what if we really never looked at our physical health? Or we never did anything. We never went to the doctor. We weren't aware of whether diet or exercise matters or any of these things at all. How could we possibly be healthy? Right? How would we possibly be healthy? So if you think about mental health, why would we be mentally healthy, right? Or certainly, why would we be as mentally healthy as we could be? And sometimes, why would we be mentally healthy at all if we're not looking at that? Life is difficult. Life is stressful. Life comes at us in a lot of ways that brings all sorts of stress and worries and fears to us. If we're not paying attention to it, why would we think that would be okay? Even a simple example of if you buy a car and you never do anything to attend to it, right? Why would we think it's going to last forever, right? And expect it not to break down. So we'll do this with our physical health. We'll do this with cars. We even do this with washing machines, for example, right? But we won't do it with our mental health. And I think it's just a glaring deficit in societal awareness, and the mental health field has failed to bring this real parity of saying, hey, you're one person, right? And you have mental health and you have physical health, and we want to pay attention to both. And mental health wellness is just as important as physical health wellness. And in fact, physical health wellness often keys upon mental health wellness. So we have to bring this message, because the what's going right that allows us to then look at what we want to be different is that message of approaching ourselves through a lens of taking care of ourselves, wanting to be healthy, right? Being concerned about wellness and all these good things. And then in the context of all of that, we are aware of if there are problems, if I'm seeing problems or other people are seeing problems outside of me, or even I feel different. I don't even know if there's a problem, but I know that I'm feeling different or I'm sleeping different. Let me go have somebody take a look, right? Or get some other opinion. But we have to normalize that. Instead, as we're feeling worse, we hide inside of ourselves. And if you imagine what happens if we're not feeling well physically, we hide from that. We know the outcomes are not good. Why would we expect that to be any different with our mental health? We must bring this normalization of mental health and mental health wellness so that we see it through the same lens that we see our physical health.
Yeah, otherwise it's this exclusive sort of, secluded psychiatrists, right? Or like the DSM. And some people don't even have access to that. But that's a whole different story. What I love in your book, it's, you have a cohesive, nice structure to follow. I want to ask you about the drives, the generative drive, and you have a nice, beautiful, inspiring story of your grandmother. I thought that was very nice. Let's talk about the generative drive, the 4 expressions of what is the generative drive and what are the 4 expressions of the drive.
Yeah. If it's okay, in talking about the generative drive, I would start with the 2 drive that classically we've been seen as having. So it's been thought that, humans have 2 drives that are born into us. And one is assertion or aggression, and the other is pleasure. And pleasure could be things that are pleasurable, or it could be having enough food, or having a roof over our heads, that we're basically machines for assertion and for seeking pleasure. But these two drives do not explain humans. They don't explain how humans have survived across all the time we have survived. They don't explain the things that are best about us. They don't explain love, altruism, art, creation, doing something good for someone when no one else is watching, right? Our humanness resides in the generative drive. And our literary traditions, our philosophical traditions, our understandings around history, we have known this as a species for many, many, many years, right? It goes back to even Greek and Roman mythology. We're writing about this. So we understand, right? We understand that this drive is in us, but psychology hasn't acknowledged this. And if we're not acknowledging the core of our humanness, that yes, we have assertion and we have the drive towards pleasure and safety, but we have a drive to leave the world better than we found it, right? And it's not just at the end of our lives, it's today. And even if just getting through today, and I'm going to get up in the morning and it's going to be quiet victories of just getting through everything I need to do today. You know, there's no band that plays for the person who gets up in the morning and just does everything that needs to be done and goes to bed at night exhausted to wake up tomorrow and do that. That person is being generative. They're keeping the train on the rails. They're keeping things moving forward. And they're often doing that without an expectation that pleasure is going to come of it or that they're going to be able to change their life situation, at least not in that moment, right? The generative drive is governing us when we are at our best. And if we see and acknowledge that that's the core of our humanness, then we get all the good things that come of it. So we do all have a structure of self, just as we have a physical body. We have a function of self, just as that body moves and does things. If we're going to those foundational aspects of our mental health, so that's the bottom-up approach, and then we're also coming top-down, where we're looking at our drives and having assertion and pleasure in balance and governed by the generative drive, then we get these good things that come to us. We get empowerment inside. So empowerment is a sense inside that I can impact the world around me, that I don't feel hopeless or helpless, and I feel that I can make a difference in the world around me and in the things that I care about. And we also have a sense of humility in us. And by humility, I do not mean like a false humility where someone is really good at something and says that they're not, right? The humility that I'm describing here is allowing ourselves to be human, to say, hey, I will make mistakes. Everything in my life will not be exactly how I want it. I can point to things in my life that I feel bad about or I feel ashamed of. Like, all this is real and true, right? But in a sense, it's okay. I can look at that and I can accept that and I can use it as an incentive, right? And a force that I do want to be better. I do want to be healthy. I can accept the issues in me without getting down on myself or beating up on myself, right? And if we can do that, then we're approaching the world through the lens of empowerment and humility, and that means we meet the world with agency and active gratitude. So then I meet the world instead of maybe hiding from something because I'm worried I won't be able to make a good outcome, right? Or I'm worried I'm going to fail at something. I feel an agency that I can bring my best self, and I'm grateful that I can bring my best self, that here I am, right? I'm not only alive, right, that I have enough understanding and enough function in me that I can bring my best self and try and make life better. And then we're meeting the world with agency and gratitude. And this is what helps keep us in balance, right? So now we keep our structure of self and our function of self in healthy places. We keep the generative drive governing us and our other drives in balance. And then we get these good things. This is how we meet life. And at the end of it, what do we really want from all of it? Is we want to be happy. Right? But say, well, what does happy mean? And we know there's enough data and studies and statistics that says that means that we can have a sense of peace where we can just don't have to have anything coming at us. We can just do something enjoyable, look at something beautiful and feel good about that without anything else having to be in us. We also have contentment in us where I can think about my life, including things that have been tragic, and I can still feel good about my life and the self that I'm bringing, right, to the world, even if there are things I'm not happy about or even feel ashamed about right now, right? Because I'm trying to bring my best self to change things for the better. I can look at myself and I can feel a sense of contentment about my life and how I'm living it. And then also we keep the capacity for delight. We want peace, contentment, and the capacity for delight, which means just like children can find delight in things and amazement, we want that too. And when we're mentally healthy, when we're happy, right? We are finding peace, contentment, and delight. And that's how this all holds together, just as the physical health model holds together. Our bodies, our organs are healthy, our muscles and joints are healthy. The function of all of it is good. We're able to engage in life the way we want. These parallels are true for our mental health. And this is how we find what we ultimately want, which is happiness through peace, contentment, and the capacity for delight.
So if someone is feeling peace, content, and delight, and grateful, and they have a sense of agency, so this is a sign of good mental health?
Yes. Yes, you can tell. Things are never perfect in us. They don't have to be. But if you tell me, here's a person who is living in that way, then I would say back to you, that person has a structure of self that is a foundation to their mental health and is in a healthy place. And they have a function of self that is also in a healthy place. And if we look upon that foundation, right, their drives are going to be in balance. They're going to be asserting themselves in the world in a good way. They're not going to be too assertive where they're trying to over-control things. Or they're not going to be too little assertive where they have learned helplessness or they feel they can't succeed so they shy away from things. So the assertion drive will be in balance. The pleasure drive will be in balance. They're not seeking short-term pleasure all the time in order to escape from something. They're not then giving up on any hope of pleasure because they don't think they can find any, right? So assertion and pleasure will be in balance for that person. And then can also tell you that person is living primarily through the generative drive, right? And more is always better. We're not trying to find balance in the generative drive. It's our humanness at its best. I will say that person has a very strong generative drive that is governing everything else. Now it all makes sense, right? Drives that are in balance, governed by the generative drive. These foundational elements of structure and function of self are in healthy places, and they have the empowerment, the humility. They're approaching life through agency and gratitude. If we look at that picture, that is a picture of health. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, and it doesn't mean we don't want that person to work on themselves. But yes, that person is in a mentally healthy place, and there's a way we can look at that and assess that and say, that is true, and here's why that is true. The same way if we see someone who has no pain, and they're out in the world, and say they're doing something good and athletic, and they're sleeping well, and we say that person seems physically healthy, right? And lo and behold, their calcium score is low, and their labs look good. So there are ways we can say if that person seems to be physically healthy, can we go look at that, right? The same is true for our mental health.
So this balance between the assertion and pleasure and the generative drive, as I'm understanding, is the indication of unhealth and mental being unhealthy. I don't know. Do you use that word, or that's not useful to use? We say mental health, but what's the opposite of mental health?
Well, we can have mental health problems. Yeah, absolutely.
Problems.
There are ways we can be mentally unhealthy. We can say that we have problems. We can say that we have issues. As often said, if we are alive, we're in one of two categories. We either have mental health problems, which hopefully we don't, but maybe we do. Depression, addiction, hopelessness, panic attacks. But if we're alive and we don't have mental health problems, we have mental health issues. Right? We all do. Life is complicated, right? We all will have some issues that are inside of us that we can look at. We can make ourselves healthier. We're not going to be free of any of that. And it's important to be honest with ourselves. What's going right and the framework that I'm presenting is not a Pollyanna framework. It says, yes, there are issues. There are either problems or issues in all of us, right? So if we're going to get at that, we're not going to be afraid to look at it. We're going to be able to make ourselves healthier, right? We have to come from the perspective of what is going right in us, and we have to have a way of understanding. If we understood nothing about our bodies, right, we wouldn't have ways of being physically healthy. Right? We wouldn't know to look at our hearts and our coronary artery calcium score and all those things. So we need a mechanism of understanding, right? Then we can say, okay, are my drives in balance? Which really means the assertion drive and the pleasure drive are sitting under the generative drive, which is governing all, right? That is not a Pollyanna concept. That means that we're facing what's difficult in our life. Even if there's no solution for it, we're still able to face it. We're able to be in balance and be as healthy as we can be, but we need a mechanism of understanding, and we need things to do. The book is designed to present, right? Here is how you can understand, and here are the things that you can do. So much can be done on our own. There will be some of us who need mental health care, and if someone who's having thoughts of not wanting to be alive or feeling overwhelmed, for example, that person needs to go to mental health care. But for most of us, there's a lot that we can do. You give a human being a route to understanding and steps that person can take. And the vast majority of us will seize to that and make ourselves healthier. And that is what I'm trying to do in the book, to make that parallel to physical health.
Yeah, it comes through, and I really like that angle a lot, normalizing that we all struggle, we all have issues, and there are things we can do to prevent, to get help, and things like that. I like the drives model a lot. It makes a lot of sense. What I was thinking, but I don't know how to formulate even my question, the notion of trauma. There's a lot of trauma talk, right, in the zeitgeist, in social media, and everywhere, and you've written a book and things like that. But I feel like sometimes that can be limiting when people, what I like about your approach, yes, we have traumas and we all have things that we're dealing with, but there's that empowerment piece, that what's going right piece, that, it's not like, oh, you're a poor victim, I feel like sometimes this trauma talks keeps people stuck. Yes, they understand their traumas, but they glorify, they get stuck. It's a little limiting, right? But we all had traumas. Like you said, the invisible epidemic in your first book. What can you say about this trauma piece? I don't even know what my question is exactly, but if you have any commentary on what I just said.
No, I think I understand what you're getting at, right? That there's a lot of talk about trauma in the world around us. So we have to define, what does trauma mean? Right? And the way that I'm defining trauma is a very medical, it's a neuroscience-based definition of trauma. It is not a soft science concept, right? What is often called big T traumas, right, are trauma that overwhelms our coping skills and leaves our brain different on the other side. Right? So that is a hard science concept, and it attaches to things like more autoimmune disease, for example, more rapid aging. So someone who could be 50 years old by the calendar, but really if you can look inside at their cells and all, they may be closer to 60. Right? So these are like shocking concepts, right? That when trauma overwhelms our coping skills, we are different going forward. We tend to see neutral faces as threatening, right? They're real changes in us. So we have to go and look and say, has a person had this big T trauma that is with them? And that could be something acute, like an accident, an assault, the loss of a loved one. It could be something chronic, someone who's discriminated against and seen as less than by society across time, for example. It can also be vicarious, someone who's looking at the news all the time and feeling so much sympathy for the, oh my goodness, people who are really suffering in other places, following the war in the Ukraine so closely. Right? That can be traumatic vicariously by the care and concern one human being can feel for others. So if these big traumas are overwhelming our coping skills and now our brains are different, well, we want to be aware of that. Right? Even if things that aren't big T traumas, but just smaller things happen and then I feel a little less confident navigating the world, we want to be aware of that too. Right? And why do we want to be aware of it? Not because it becomes a reason for what's not going well in our lives. And if we don't have understanding and a mental health system that doesn't have leadership that guides us towards understanding, then what happens is these traumas often become reasons. Well, the reason I haven't done as well as I want to at work is like this thing happened to me, or the reason I'm not finding a good relationship partner, or I'm even staying in a bad relationship, or even an abusive relationship is, well, because this thing happened to me or that thing happened to me. No, that is bad for us. That is bad for human beings. We want to look at what's real and true, and then we want to bring change. So if after a trauma, I'm behaving differently in the world, and I was really doing well at work before, but now I'm not doing so well, or I'm avoiding other people, or I'm being short with other people, right? The idea is to see that and see it through the lens of what's going right. Something bad happened to me. I had a big trauma. I'm still getting up in the morning, right? I'm still getting myself ready. I'm still doing all the things to get to work, to do my job. So there's a lot that's going right, but there's something that's not. After that trauma, like I can see that I'm different. Let's understand that and change it, right? And bring change. That is the purpose of understanding. It's to bring healthy change. And, people will often say or think it must be a very unpleasant job or even a miserable job that I do because, people are so unhealthy and mental health isn't in a good place and no one ever gets better. And I think, where did that come from? Like, that is not true. When we bring mechanisms of understanding and practical routes to change, right, we do see things that are very uplifting. I mean, I enjoy the job. I love the job that I do. Sometimes we're sitting with people through very difficult things and it can be distressing and all of that, but we absolutely see people get better. And why wouldn't that be the case? Again, give a human being a route to understanding and mechanisms of change. That person will not be saying, well, this thing happened to me or I was treated in this way and that's why X. The person will be saying, this thing happened to me or I was treated in this way and here's how I understand that and I'm not letting that hold me back.
So you still have an active practice, right? You
Yes.
work with people. Do you work with young people like 19, 20, in their 20s? The reason I'm asking is what I am hearing from parents. There's a lot of failure to launch. A lot of young people lack quote unquote motivation. They're lazy. They struggle with mental health issues. They don't want to work. They don't want to go to college. They just want to live with their parents. Are you seeing these kinds of trends?
Yes. And mental health also, the field is not exercising leadership here either, even though there's essentially infinite diagnoses in the DSM when you look at all the modifiers and all the things that you can do. What the book is looking to do is to give a diagnosis so we can attach a number to a person, right? Mm-hmm. It's not looking to understand. So then being demoralized is not in the book, right? It's not a mental health diagnosis, but guess what? It's still real. Right? And there's a lot of demoralization in younger people who just don't see how they can get ahead. They look at the world around them and they don't see how they can succeed. They don't see how they can earn enough to start a family or to buy a home. They don't see how they can get ahead, and they see a world where so much negative is coming to us. And that's not false either, right? Unfortunately, the 24-hour news cycle of just negative is that in itself can be very, very traumatizing. Like literally, it can make brain change in us for the worse. But it is sending messages that says, we're all going to hell in a handbasket and there's nothing we can do about it, and you can't make your life any better. Right? So as a society, we have to be aware that, yes, we are imposing on people, on younger people who are feeling a sense of hopelessness and feeling a sense of betrayal by the people who came before them, who are then responsible for this situation that we see around us. Now, someone who's demoralized can also have real clinical depression or have panic attacks, for example. So we want to look at that and look at what's real and true. We also should be looking at, hey, this is a societal problem. It's a problem from how we are handling ourselves in the world. I mean, look at how we use our resources. Right? Even you think in the United States that our infrastructure is getting so old, our roads, our bridges. I mean, we're not even doing the basic maintenance in our own home, our home metaphorically in our country. So what message are we sending when, we can't use resources? We're happy to fight each other all the time and say how, everyone who disagrees is wrong. And, we have more and more animosity between people and more resources spent on things that are about anger and frustration towards others. And as we do this, our roads are, crumbling, our bridges are collapsing. So we all need to look at how are we handling ourselves in the world. It starts with each person. But if we are looking at ourselves and we are making ourselves more mentally healthy, right? We're looking at what's going right. We're looking at what's not the way we want it to be. And that might be how we're having conflict. If you and I disagree about something politically, what do? Do we attack one another, right? Do we do that? If so, why do we do that instead of saying, okay, gosh, you have a different opinion than I do. That's okay, right? Why do we have assail one another, right? If we start looking at things like this and say, even if we have different political opinions, you know what? We both want our bridges to stay up, right? We both want our roads to be safe, right? So there's way more going right there than is going wrong, meaning we rely on much, much more, right? We all want the world to be safer for our children, for example, right? So if we anchor to this, where we say, well, let's disagree and agree to disagree. Why do we have to be hateful to one another? Then if we're doing that, we're more than unified, saying, hey, let's look at what really matters here, right? We want to be safe. We want our healthcare system to be better. We want our infrastructure to to be better. So this is how it has to start with individual people. But if we make ourselves healthier, we will make our communities healthier, whether that's the small community of a household, for example, or a neighborhood, right? And that comes out to larger communities like cities, states, and the whole nation, and ultimately the whole world. And again, I would argue that is not Pollyanna in any way, shape, or form, that it follows the scientific progression of like, yes, this is how this would work to make the world better. And then we're not having our young people like steeped in, it's like the air around them is infused with this sense of frustration and hopelessness. We can change that, but we have to work to change it on ourselves and on our systems and on the society that we live in.
Yeah, well, this makes me think of something like that. We know that the best predictor of children's well-being and health and happiness is the parental mental health. And last year in JAMA Internal Medicine, a study came out that from 2016 to 2023, maternal mental health has declined severely. This is based on self-reports of, I think, over 200,000 female parents. So if parents are not well, clearly that's going to impact their children. And then, right, if children are not well, it's going to impact the parents. It's bidirectional. So I just made some connection in my mind when you were speaking about that. I don't know if you have anything to say about that, but I want to ask you about the self-inquiry process that you talk about in the book.
Yes. The thing that you just mentioned, you think about what you just said and the magnitude of it. They're saying across a very large sample size, the mental health of mothers is getting much worse. Like, why are we not really upset about that? Like, why is that not in our headlines? Right? But it's easy for us to turn away from that when, wow, that should be at the forefront of our minds. The mental health of mothers is getting worse. Well, also the mental health of the children is getting worse. But yet we let this go on and we're paying attention to other things. And I think we don't know where the world will go. Could it go towards destruction of everything? It could, right? It could. We want it not to do that, right? If we want to lead ourselves in the right direction towards health and even towards just survival, right, then we have to look at these things and say, wow, that's a short period of time for maternal health to be plummeting, right? That should be at the forefront of our minds. But again, it's not sexy in the sense of it's not, it doesn't gain attention like political fights or a person's latest bad behavior, that makes the news cycle, or the same negative news we're hearing over and over again. But we need to look at these things that are very, very powerful and that are really ominous unless we really look at them and do something about it.
Yeah, for sure. Because we're raising our kids, right? Mothers are raising their children. If they're not well, that impacts the kids. There was another study that children of depressed mothers have behavioral issues in school, like significant outbursts and behavioral issues. You're right. Yeah. It doesn't make the headlines. Even, I think 2 years ago, it was the former U.S. surgeon Vivek Murthy released a report called Parents Under Pressure. In it, it was indicated that 41% of today's parents, it wasn't like just moms, today's parents, I think it said 41% was that they're in burnout, they're barely functioning. And 48%, they said they are completely overwhelmed, like day to day, like it's hard for them. So and who's going to parent our kids if we are in this condition? And obviously kids, it's going to affect the kids. It's just, it's kind of depressing when you think about it. But obviously there are things we can do to improve our well-being and mental health. And it starts by talking and informing people and sharing this kind of podcast and information.
It starts with fighting against the stigma of mental health and saying, just as we look at our physical health and we kind of get it about our physical health, we need the same for our mental health. But again, we have to pay attention. You're saying things that are striking and even shocking, right? That's a huge percentage of people who are just overwhelmed. Right? But that in terms of the general news is like obscure information, right? Where it should be in our headlines of like, whoa, this is a very bright yellow light, right? Telling us we better slow down, or even it's a red light telling us we better stop and we better rethink this. But, we have not had the inclination to do that. And I think, yes, we could hope things might change top down. But I think the way that this is going to change, if it's going to change, is going to be bottom up, or there's going to be a huge component of bottom up where I say, like, I want my mental health to be in a good place. And I'm not afraid or embarrassed or ashamed to say that. Just like I have a body, I have a mind. I want the body and the mind to be healthy. So I don't want to look away from it. I want a mechanism of understanding, and I want practical routes to change. I'm going to make myself healthier, and that is going to affect the world around me, right? If we can help each of those mothers to be healthier, one, that matters just because that person matters. Right? Whether she's a mother or not, she's a person and she matters, right? So we're going to help that person, and then by helping that person, we're helping her help her children, right? So now we're so off to the races of making things better. But we have to do that, which means we have to pay attention to it. And instead of being afraid of it and turning away from it, right, we have to feel like, oh, why would I not go towards that? I want to be healthier.
Yeah. So what can we do then ourselves? Like, a good place to start, I think, is the self-inquiry process that you talk about that also helped you significantly in your life. Where do we start? You have wonderful exercises and questions in the book. There was one quote I was going to read. It says, "Without reflection, we go blindly on our way, creating more unintended consequences and failing to achieve anything useful. It's amazing to me how much we do, but how little time we spend reflecting on what we just did." That's someone else's quote you highlighted in the book, which is so true.
Yes.
So where do we start the self-inquiry process?
There are ways we can get a foothold. I do try and really set forth, like, here is what you can do around your structure of self, your function of self, these foundational aspects of your mental health, around understanding your drives, and try and be very, very practical in the book. So I am trying to bring that, because not everyone can go to mental health help, and sometimes getting a start with what's in the book maybe that's very helpful to a person. I hope it is for people, or it may be that it starts a process of interest in the self and it works against stigma. And if that person would benefit from mental health help, they feel empowered to go and get mental health help. So I do try and be very, very practical in the book. There are also things, I'll just say 2 examples, that we can do that don't have to be anchored, to a structure, to a process. Is we can look at, what is our self-talk like? What am I saying to myself, in quiet moments when there's just time to pause? What's inside of me? What do I say to myself if I make a mistake? Right? Or if I do something I don't feel great about, like, how am I talking to myself? How am I treating myself? I've been saying this a lot lately because I'm so struck by it, that there are often these signs that you'll see in businesses that will say, the beatings will not stop until morale improves. And I think that's very, very interesting. Like, why would we make signs? And we know it's meant to be humorous, but it's based in something that's real. Right? It's based on something that will resonate with people, that very often that's exactly what we're doing to ourselves. We're just saying, I want to feel better, but I'm going to continue beating myself up until I feel better. So I'm going to continue saying to myself, what's wrong with you? Or how could you make that mistake? Over and over again until things get better. That's what means things will not get better. Right? As I've said many times to people, if someone followed you around all day and told you that you were incapable, or was like really harshly critical to you every time something wasn't perfect, it'd be very, very hard to change. And it's actually worse than that. And that person is you inside of yourself, right? So don't make yourself special in a negative way. Let's start looking at you as you would look at someone else, right? And this is not to say we're letting ourselves off from all of our problems, right? It's to say, no, we would say, okay, that's not great. We want this thing to change, right? So how could we bring change? Let's think about your life. Let's think about what's going right in your life that could help you make that better. We wouldn't say to someone else, it's just because you're terrible and you'll never get better, right? But we'll say it to ourselves, right? So we have to be aware of, what is our self-talk? What are we doing to ourselves, right? How do we be fair and honest and real with ourselves? It doesn't mean we're letting ourselves off the hook. It means, like, that's the route to making things better. The same can be done with even a brief life narrative. Many times, if you'd say to someone, just tell me about your life and yourself, and the person just talks for 10 minutes, or they write a page, just one side of a piece of a notebook paper, very often that what that person writes it does not fit with their life. and they don't know it. So if you think it's remarkable that we could do this and say, oh, okay, I'll write and write about my life, but the person might write things that are quite negative. Like, I get a real specific case of someone writing how just things have not gone well and no one likes this person. They can't get along with people, but they're struggling and they're doing their best. And then you see there's a person who's many people care about this person and see this person as a good force in the world, but they don't see that. Because we get down on ourselves and then we buy that story. If I'm saying negative things to myself, I'm going to make a story about myself that is negative. And I may forget things that are true and positive. You mentioned in the book I write about my grandmother, right? At a time when I felt very overwhelmed, affected by tragedies, in a place of significant depression. I completely forgot about, there was a whole phase of my life where she was loving and nurturing, and I was a lot like her in the world, and I forgot that. Something so important, because I was so lost in the negativity of like all these things that were wrong in me and how I wasn't going to ever be able to get my way out of it. So it is striking and maybe even shocking that we could think, I'll tell you about myself, and like even I know that's wrong once I stop and look at it, right? But this is what we will do if we're like living an unexamined life and we're not looking at, what do I think about myself? Why do I think about that about myself? If I think no one likes me, like, is that true? If I think I'm not good enough, what does that mean? Why am I saying this? Is that someone else's voice in my head? Is it my voice that's been persecuting me for so long I can't tell the difference, right? Between what's true and what's not true. We need to bring compassionate curiosity to ourselves, and thinking about your self-talk when no one else is listening, it's just inside of your head. And what is your story of self? These are footholds. These are routes in. They can be very, very helpful to us. And it can also anchor to the processes that I write about in the book of saying, here's how you can understand. Here are routes to bringing change. I mean, this is part of that, but they're just two things you can do right now if you chose to.
Yeah. I wish there was some kind of an instrument that can attach to people's head and make the voices of their inner dialogue like audible so that they can hear,
And here's what's interesting is you say that. I think the instrument's already in our head. It's our brain. But we have to use our brain to observe our brain, right? If I don't stop and think, what am I saying to myself? Then I'll keep saying it to myself, and I won't know or notice that I'm saying to myself. So I agree. I wish we had something we just put over us and then we would know and hear. In the absence of that, the good news is, right, here's what's going right. We have a functioning brain inside, and the brain can do that. But we have to bring compassionate curiosity to ourselves. We have to gain enough distance to say, I'm curious about myself. How am I behaving? Right? How do I see myself inside? What am I saying to myself? And it's like, we can do this. It's the thing we can do it with is already inside of us.
Yeah, you write about the power of mindfulness and meditation and compassion. I like that. What is an antidote to this negative self-talk? Like if someone has a severe inner dialogue, inner chatter, are they able to get rid of it? Like, what have you seen through your practice? Does it take a lot of time and practice? I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Yes, the answer to can you get rid of it is absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. But you have to understand how. There has to be a way of doing that. And you have to understand that it will take time. Right? If the self-talk has been going on over and over and over again, it's not just going to go away. It's like if you and I chose a word right now and said it 500 times or 1,000 times, it'll still be with us tomorrow morning, right? It'll still be with us tomorrow night. It stays with us. So if we've said these things to ourselves over and over again, they won't go away overnight. And we live in a society where we want very rapid we want rapid results, right? So often, even people who've come to mental health care, you say, why did they stop? Oh, they didn't get any better. But they spent 4 weeks trying to do something that's going to take 4 months. Or maybe even 4 years. But it's not 4 years or 4 months until anything gets better. It's a process. And if we see that we are getting better along the way, we're not where we want to be yet, but like I can see, maybe, you know what now, instead of 10 out of 10 times I say something mean to myself inside, I don't notice and it goes, maybe now it's only 9 out of 10. 1 out of 10 times I can notice it. That's a win. Let's use that 1 and try and get to 2. But what we have to have a framing, and in a mental health world that does not value understanding, right? It just wants to polish the hood when there's something going on in the engine. We're not framing things in a way that's empowering. Here's what you can bring to bear to change that, right? And that will take some time. And we also, you said, how do we get at it? The answer is by playing Sherlock Holmes, right? It can be fun to be a detective. And a lot of times this is what I'm doing. I'm saying, well, no one comes out of the womb. It's a metaphor, but no one comes out of the womb saying awful things to themselves. Where did that come from? Let's be interested in that instead of being scared, like, oh my God, what am I saying to myself? And then we hide away and we're ashamed and we're afraid. Let's just look at that. Like, it's interesting. You're saying mean things to yourself, like, over and over again. What are those mean things? Is it the same thing over and over again? Does it cluster around a certain aspect of yourself? If maybe you don't think you're smart enough, or you don't think you have a good enough personality, or whatever it may be, let's look at where is that clustering and where might that have come from? Maybe that's someone else's voice in your head that you've just carried forward without saying, maybe I want to unlearn that lesson because it's not right or true. Maybe it's your own voice, but after a couple of things didn't go well. People who will say, I can never have a relationship. I'm never going to find a good partner. Sometimes that's anchored to someone who's been abusive to them in the past and told them that they weren't worth anything. But sometimes there have been a couple bad relationships and the person gets so down on themselves, now they think that they can't change anything. They don't really think that. They're just saying it to themselves over and over again. So let's just get curious about it. Let's bring compassionate curiosity to our detective work, and we will find answers to make things better.
I want to end this conversation by giving you a chance to say, like, what do you want the reader to take away from this book? What is, like, your main hope, or what do you want to change? Maybe the conversation about mental health, and what ignites you about this book? What's going right with this lens?
I want to bring first and foremost the message that you can understand yourself, at least significantly, far, far better than we do if we don't look at ourselves, right? We can understand, and we can use that understanding to bring healthy change. That just as we have a way of understanding our physical health and being healthy and caring about wellness, the same is true of our mental health. So I want to bring that message. And then the second very important message is that when we are governed by the generative drive, we are in balance. The foundational aspects of our mental health are in a healthy place. These good things like agency and active gratitude sit on top of it. We're in a good range for assertion and pleasure seeking that really work for us. And the generative drive is holding all of that in a good place. And that just as we're well aware that we can spiral downward in our health, we can also spiral upward. We can have an up cycle of goodness in us where we get healthier and we look and say, oh, here's something in the structure of myself, something that's in my conscious mind over and over again. I'd like to change that, right? So now we bring the structure and the function into line. Now we're more able to live through the generative drive. And when we're more generative, more likely to keep ourselves healthy, right? So that there is good that can come from all of this, far from something we should feel ashamed of or afraid of and look away from. It's the exact opposite. And when we do that, things can get better, things do get better. So it's an anti-hopelessness message, right? But it's also a message of responsibility, that in coming at ourselves and looking at what's going right, that's how we can identify what needs to be different, make what needs to be different. Now we're healthier, and there's a self that sees with greater clarity. There's an empowered self that we then carry forward, whether it's furthering the improvement in our mental health, right? Or it's enjoying life as much as we can, or it's dealing with some trauma or some issue that may come at us that then may tax our mental health. So we can be healthier, and that being healthier makes a difference, and it leads us towards what we all want. And the data and the studies tell us that we want happiness. We want to be able to find peace, contentment, and the capacity for delight.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your presence and
You're
your
welcome.
wisdom.
You're very welcome.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it, and the ability to have this conversation and to help get there. So thank you for having me.
Yes, of course, my pleasure. And good luck.
Thank you.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening. This episode was edited and produced by Ami Noor. If you need expert support to bring your dream podcast to life, from editing to full production, Ami Noor can help make it happen. You'll find his link in the show notes.